When I first set eyes on Oak Ridge Villas, the neighborhood seemed like a dream. Nestled in a tranquil corner of an expanding suburban region, it boasted neatly trimmed lawns and winding streets lined with young maple trees. Community living at its finest, the brochure had promised. And in many ways, it delivered. The homes were attractively designed, with open-concept kitchens and airy porches perfect for Sunday barbecues. What I didn't realize at the time was that Oak Ridge Villas had an exceptionally active HOA, one that, depending on who you asked, was either a champion of neighborly values or a meddler in personal freedoms. The association was run by a board of 5, but effectively, one voice dominated above all others, Brianna Arnholt, though she insisted that everyone call her Karen. Karen was a middle-aged woman with a crisp bob of dyed blonde hair, a penchant for pastel cardigans, and a laser-focused gaze that told you she meant business. She had, by all accounts, turned the HOA into her personal arena of endless projects. Some were innocuous, like adding seasonal flower beds, others more invasive, like policing the length of grass to within half an inch. But none of her initiatives came close to the fiasco she unleashed when she demanded that every home in Oak Ridge Villas adopt 10 separate trash bins for meticulously sorted waste. This is the story of how that ill-advised plan nearly held our neighborhood hostage, and how a city petition, fueled by neighborly exasperation, brought Karen's elaborate waste management scheme to a crashing halt. When I moved in, I actually admired a few of Karen's policies. The requirement for basic recycling made sense, and the gentle reminders to keep sidewalks clear of debris ensured the neighborhood stayed pleasant to stroll through. I had no real quarrel with her at first. I even admired her stated passion for the environment. She'd mentioned climate concerns and plastic pollution at HOA meetings, urging us to do more than the bare minimum. She also had a knack for personal drama. I recall how she chastised one neighbor for leaving a cardboard box out by the curb for more than 3 hours. "A soap box is worthless to recycling," she'd said. "Don't you care about the earth?" Her tone dripped with condescension, but she was, in principle, pointing out that weather-ruined cardboard often ends up in the landfill. I didn't want to dismiss her eco-consciousness. After all, many of us want to do better for the planet. If Karen had stuck to encouraging moderate improvements, like properly rinsing out jars or flattening cardboard, nobody would have objected much. But Karen saw herself as a crusader, and that crusading spirit would soon bulldoze common sense. One cloudy Tuesday, an email landed in every resident's inbox with a subject line reading, "Exciting new green initiative for Oak Ridge Villas." My curiosity piqued. I opened it immediately. Inside, Karen wrote at length about innovative environmental stewardship and the urgent necessity for refined waste management. Her solution? A plan for every household to maintain 10 distinct trash and recycling bins, each color-coded for different categories of waste. Green bin, compostable kitchen scraps. Brown bin, yard waste, branches, clippings, leaves. Blue bin, plastics number 1 and number 2. Light blue bin, plastics number 3 through number 7. White bin, paper and cardboard, clean only. Gray bin, paper towels and tissues, lightly soiled. Red bin, aluminum and steel cans. Yellow bin, glass bottles and jars. Purple bin, miscellaneous recyclables, batteries, small electronics. Black bin, actual trash headed for landfill. My eyes nearly popped out of my head reading the email. 10 separate bins? We barely had room for the standard 2 or 3 containers most neighborhoods used. Where would we store them all, especially those of us with single-car garages? Our sidewalks would look like we'd set up a rainbow blockade every trash day. The city's sanitation trucks certainly weren't equipped to handle so many specialized pickups. Karen's plan seemed like a logistical and spatial nightmare. Yet in her email, Karen was brimming with confidence. She cited unspecified, pending city regulations, which turned out not to exist, and claimed that Oak Ridge Villas would set a stellar example for other communities. She also declared that a new, mandatory waste sorting class would be held twice monthly to train everyone on the correct usage of each bin. Word spread instantly, and the neighborhood erupted in confusion. By evening, my phone buzzed nonstop with texts from neighbors asking, "Is she serious?" Or, "How is that even workable?" I had no answers. The following Saturday, the HOA met in the small clubhouse near the entrance of Oak Ridge Villas. Normally, These gatherings drew 10 or 15 people. This time, the room was packed with at least 40 residents, all eager to protest or at least question the 10-bin system. Karen sat at the front, flanked by the other 4 board members, with a neatly printed stack of leaflets labeled Oak Ridge 10-bin Initiative. She opened the meeting by praising everyone's commitment to environmental consciousness. Then, with a glimmer of pride, she launched into a slideshow describing her plan in detail. Each bin was assigned a color, matching a bullet point on the slides. She explained how households would weigh each category weekly, record the numbers on a chart, and upload them to a special website. Allegedly, we'd use these stats to optimize our consumption patterns. I glanced around, seeing the dismay on neighbors' faces. Some looked baffled, others looked furious. One man, Mr. Holton, finally raised his hand. "Where are we supposed to store these bins?" he asked. "I only have space for 2. My garage barely fits my car." Karen gave a tight-lipped smile. "It's about rethinking your storage approach," she replied. "You can keep some in the backyard or line them along the side of your house. The important thing is to manage them responsibly." A woman named Sherry shook her head. "What about the city's waste pickup schedule? They only come once a week for garbage, once every 2 weeks for recycling. Are they going to run a separate truck for every category? That's not how it works." Karen waved off the concern. "I've emailed the sanitation department. They just need to adapt. In time, all communities will realize 10 bins is the path forward. Oak Ridge is pioneering what will become the new normal." The grumbles in the audience grew louder. I stood and asked if there'd been a formal vote or if the board was simply imposing this on us. Karen insisted the board had reached a consensus based on her research, but one board member, Ms. Lane, visibly squirmed. She admitted quietly, "Actually, Karen, we only discussed the idea in principle. We never took a formal vote on making it mandatory." Karen shrugged dismissively. "Formalities aside, the plan is unstoppable. We must do our part to combat waste. Anyone who resists is just delaying progress." The tension in the room thickened. Karen's unwavering stance was galling. Even those who supported eco-friendly measures balked at the complexity and lack of coordination with city services. But Karen refused to yield. She ended the meeting by distributing sign-up sheets for the waste sorting class, effectively ignoring the avalanche of objections. We left feeling railroaded, uncertain how to proceed, other than to vow we wouldn't let her plan go unchallenged. Over the next week, I discovered that practically every neighbor I spoke with opposed Karen's plan. Even the most enthusiastic recyclers in the neighborhood found it absurd. The issue wasn't that we hated sorting waste. We just found the 10 separate bins approach far beyond practical. Some had large families with limited storage. Others had physical limitations. Some simply didn't have the yard space for so many containers. Most importantly, the local waste management service wasn't set up to handle such fine distinctions. Karen, however, was forging ahead. She posted a message in the neighborhood app claiming that mandatory rollout of the new bins would begin in 2 months. She even threatened that failure to comply might result in HOA fines. This was news to everyone, including other board members who seemed unsure whether Karen had the authority to impose such fines unilaterally. A few of us banded together to strategize. We held an informal gathering at my house, just a half-dozen neighbors to start. Mark and Diana, who lived across the street, arrived with notepads. Rochelle, a retired teacher, brought a binder of city recycling regulations she'd printed from the municipality's website. Dawn and Luis, who had teenage kids, explained how impossible it would be to coordinate so many bins in their cramped garage. We shared stories, vented frustrations, and arrived at a consensus. We needed to confirm exactly what the local city rules were on waste disposal. If the city only recognized 2 or 3 categories, trash, recycling, yard waste, then Karen's elaborate scheme would be legally unenforceable. Perhaps we could present that fact to the rest of the HOA board, forcing them to see reason. If that failed, we might escalate to city officials, explaining how the 10-bin plan clashed with the city's actual sanitation codes. We formed a small research committee. I volunteered to handle city contacts, while Rochelle combed through municipal documents for any mention of multi-bin recycling requirements. Mark offered to speak with local waste management staff he knew through his job. We also decided to start collecting signatures in case we needed to file a formal petition or demonstrate that the majority of Oak Ridge residents opposed this plan. Empowered by a sense of shared purpose, we parted ways that evening determined to stop Karen's madness. While we scrambled to gather information, Karen redoubled her efforts to make the 10-bin plan seem inevitable. Within days, she distributed a professionally designed pamphlet, complete with color photos of happy families sorting trash into bright containers, touting the future of Oak Ridge Villas. She pinned copies on bulletin boards in the clubhouse, left them in neighbors' mail slots, and even taped them to front doors. Some pamphlets included a suggested layout for storing bins, a color-coded diagram for your driveway or side yard. In reality, it was borderline impossible for many of us. The diagrams didn't consider, for example, that certain lots were narrow, or that some houses had homeowners who struggled with mobility. It was as though Karen believed if she simply bombarded us with enough glossy propaganda, we'd all comply. In the next HOA meeting, this time with fewer people attending, Karen tried to pass a resolution that pre-approval for the new bin arrangement was in effect. 2 other board members looked uneasy, but she spoke with such force, claiming that resistance has died down and most neighbors are on board, that the board members half-heartedly gave a thumbs up. She wrote up HOA Regulation 47B, purporting to require each home to have all 10 bins on site by the designated rollout date. My phone buzzed incessantly that afternoon with texts from neighbors who were stunned. She actually passed it? Is this for real? People began to worry about official fines if they refused. We realized that a mild protest within the neighborhood wasn't enough. Karen had effectively steamrolled the board. We needed a stronger weapon, the city's authority. By this point, Rochelle's research was yielding fruit. She found that local municipal codes specified 3 categories: refuse, general trash, recyclables, paper, plastic, metal, glass, etc., and yard waste. Nowhere did it mandate separate bins for each subset of recyclables. And nowhere did it mention any plan for a specialized multi-stream system like Karen's. In fact, the city's official stance was that local neighborhoods wanting more separation than that needed to work directly with the sanitation department to coordinate. Clearly, Karen had done no such coordination. She'd just fired off a couple of emails demanding the city step up. When Mark spoke with a friend at the waste management office, the friend laughed at the notion of 10 different bin pickups. "We have no trucks for that," he said. "It would cost a fortune. We can't do separate runs for each color-coded category. That's not city policy." We decided the next step was to gather as many signatures as possible from Oak Ridge Villas residents who opposed the plan, then file a formal petition with the city, stating that the HOA's new regulation was burdensome, unworkable, and not in line with existing ordinances. If the city recognized our argument, they could issue a statement invalidating Karen's new rule. After all, an HOA can't enforce a policy that violates higher-level codes or that the city's services cannot support. Over the next 2 weeks, a wave of door-to-door visits ensued. Our group of volunteers expanded to about a dozen, each assigned a street or cluster of homes. We toted clipboards with a concise petition letter at the top, followed by a grid for signatures and addresses. The letter explained, the proposed 10-bin system was not mandated by city code. The city had no infrastructure to support such a detailed separation of waste. The storage and logistical burden on residents was excessive. We demanded the HOA rescind the plan or, failing that, we requested the city step in to prevent its enforcement. I encountered neighbor after neighbor who was eager to sign. Even those who were typically apathetic about HOA affairs recognized how absurd the plan was. Some shared stories of having no side yard at all, or physically struggling to haul multiple bins to the curb. One older woman exclaimed, "I can barely manage my single can. 10 is out of the question." A father of 3 joked that the kids would soon have to memorize which plastic item went into light blue versus blue, or risk a penalty. Within a short time, we gathered an overwhelming majority of households on the petition. Our official membership list had about 120 homes in Oak Ridge. We quickly racked up over 100 signatures, which was more than enough to demonstrate that Karen's claims of broad support were baseless. A few folks were uncertain or hesitant, worried about confronting the HOA, but nearly everyone recognized how unfeasible the plan was. Karen, meanwhile, got wind of our petition efforts. She began sending out emails implying that any petition subverting our environmental goals is a selfish, anti-green measure. She accused us of holding back progress to cling to old habits. Tensions rose. She even tried to call an emergency HOA meeting to shame those who refused to comply. But by then, the momentum was on our side. Most neighbors simply ignored her summons. Once we had the final petition signed by well over half the neighborhood, we arranged a meeting at City Hall. Rochelle and I contacted the city's Office of Neighborhood and Community Affairs, requesting an appointment to present our case. They agreed to hear us out, scheduling a 30-minute slot a week later. We arrived on a sunny afternoon, armed with a binder of documents. The petition itself, with signatures neatly organized. Printouts of local sanitation ordinances showing that only 3 categories, trash, recycling, yard waste, were recognized by city services. Emails and pamphlets from Karen illustrating her plan. Photos and rough diagrams demonstrating the impracticality of storing so many bins on typical Oak Ridge lots. A city official named Ms. Valencia greeted us in a modest conference room. After introductions, we laid out our concerns step by step. Ms. Valencia listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. She seemed sympathetic yet professional. When we finished our summary, Ms. Valencia rubbed her chin. The city has never mandated more than a couple bins for recycling. If your HOA wants a more specialized system, they'd have to fund it themselves and coordinate with a private hauler. Our municipal trucks won't do it. Did your HOA approach any private waste company? We exchanged glances. As far as we knew, Karen had not consulted any private entity. She just expected the city to adapt. Rochelle explained how Karen had unilaterally claimed a city partnership was forthcoming, when in reality, no official arrangement existed. Ms. Valencia nodded gravely. Well, that's a major oversight. We certainly have no program to accommodate 10 separate bins. If the HOA is forging a policy that effectively forces residents to do something we can't support, that's a significant concern. She took notes, asked to keep some copies of our evidence, and assured us the city would follow up. We left feeling cautiously optimistic. At minimum, we'd lodged a formal complaint and proven that Karen's plan wasn't aligned with municipal services. The real question was whether the city would take definitive action to block the plan or just let the neighborhood fight it out internally. A few days later, word leaked that the city had sent a notice to the HOA board. Although we didn't see the exact letter right away, we heard from Ms. Lane, one of the more reasonable board members, that it basically stated, the city does not endorse or support a 10-bin system. No additional pickups for specialized waste streams will be provided. Any HOA-imposed policy that contradicts existing municipal waste service guidelines may be unenforceable. Shortly after, Karen called an impromptu gathering in the clubhouse. The mood was electric as we filed into the hall. She stood at the front, arms folded, face tense. The board members flanked her, most looking uncomfortable. Karen cleared her throat and addressed the room. I regret to inform you that certain individuals in Oak Ridge have petitioned the city to undermine our progressive approach to waste sorting. The city, clearly not as forward-thinking as we are, has decided they won't cooperate with our new bins. This is a blow to environmental stewardship. Her gaze swept across the audience, pausing on me and Rochelle, as though we'd personally attacked her. I want to express my disappointment, she continued. We had a real chance to lead by example. But thanks to this petition, the city has blocked our initiative. They claim it's unfeasible under current infrastructure. So, for now, the 10-bin program must be suspended. A few in the crowd snickered quietly at the word suspended. We all knew it was effectively dead in the water. The city's letter had pulled the rug out from under her. If the city wouldn't handle those bins, how on earth would Karen enforce them? Still, she wasn't about to concede graciously. She ranted about short-sightedness, about missed opportunities. She made vague threats that, once new city officials come into office, we'll try again. But the core fact was undeniable. Her plan couldn't proceed without city backing. One man in the audience, who rarely spoke at meetings, raised his hand. So, does this mean we don't have to buy all those bins you wanted us to get? Karen gave him a frosty look. I suppose not, she spat. I suppose you're free to continue your lazy recycling habits. At that, the tension broke. People exchanged relieved grins. The fiasco was effectively over. As the crowd dispersed, a wave of relief washed over me. Neighbors congratulated each other, hugging or shaking hands, excited that we'd successfully stopped the plan. Rochelle beamed, proud that her in-depth research had proven so crucial. Mark and Diana high-fived, joking about the color-coded diagrams that would never see the light of day. The next day, the city posted a general notice on its website clarifying that no new specialized multi-bin requirements would be put in place for Oak Ridge Villas or any other community, unless official legislation was passed, which was unlikely anytime soon. The city also mentioned that if HOAs wanted more advanced recycling, they had to partner privately and manage the logistics themselves. That was presumably far beyond Karen's capacity, since it would mean additional fees and complicated arrangements. In short, the city's position left no wiggle room for her plan to come back in a stealthier form. Karen went silent in the immediate aftermath. For about a week, no new bulletins came from her. No emails. It was as though she retreated to lick her wounds. The rest of the HOA board, meanwhile, scrambled to do damage control, reassuring residents that the standard 3-bin system, trash, recycling, yard waste, would remain intact, and no one would face fines for not adopting any new methods. Some neighbors worried that Karen might launch a petty vendetta. She had a history of doubling down when challenged. But the massive blow to her authority seemed to leave her momentarily deflated. People started talking openly about the possibility of voting her out of the board at the next election. Others speculated she might resign. For the moment, though, she remained in her position, albeit with much of her credibility shredded. Once the dust settled, Oak Ridge Villas returned to its regular routine. Trash day came and went with the usual single can plus a bin for mixed recyclables and maybe a paper bag for yard clippings. The environment didn't collapse because we failed to adopt Karen's color-coded dream. If anything, neighbors seemed more conscientious after the fiasco. There was a subtle sense of renewed interest in recycling properly. Perhaps the drama had reminded us of the importance of doing our part responsibly, though not to the extreme Karen had demanded. A few weeks later, the city council held a public discussion on local waste management. Some Oak Ridge Villas residents attended, partly out of curiosity. The council members repeated that multi-bin separation beyond basic categories simply wasn't feasible under the current contract with the waste haulers. They encouraged recycling, but also reaffirmed that advanced sorting systems typically require private partnerships and willing participants, not forced compliance from above. Karen never appeared at that meeting. Word was that she was too humiliated to show her face. However, she did pop up at the next HOA board gathering, where she insisted on implementing more modest environmental improvements, such as encouraging a volunteer composting station at the community garden. People seemed more open to that idea: voluntary participation, small scale, and no mandatory purchase of bins. It was a sign that maybe she learned, or at least recognized she couldn't steamroll everyone. Time would tell if Karen would moderate her approach or plot another grand scheme. For now, the neighbors savored the victory of reason over an outlandish plan. We'd proven that when we band together, we can stand up to an overreaching board member who tries to impose impossible mandates. The city's backing was crucial, but equally important was our unity in refusing to let one individual's obsession disrupt our lives. Looking back, the 10-bin fiasco underscored several lessons about living under a homeowners association. The first is that transparency and communication are vital. If Karen had started by holding open discussions, seeking genuine input from residents, and coordinating with city officials, she might have discovered a scaled-back plan that worked. Instead, she unilaterally tried to impose a monstrous system. The second lesson is that HOAs have limits. While they can regulate property appearance and communal areas, they can't override city infrastructure. No matter how passionate a board member might be about a cause, if it contradicts municipal laws or the practical realities of local services, it won't fly. Third, we learn the power of community mobilization. Initially, many of us felt powerless, expecting Karen to do as she pleased. But once we started talking to each other, comparing experiences, and organizing a petition, we discovered we had the capacity to push back. That sense of solidarity didn't vanish once the bins issue was resolved. It strengthened our neighborhood ties. I saw more neighbors out chatting on sidewalks, sharing yard tips, or offering to recycle each other's extra boxes. We realized we had more in common than we'd thought, and that unity was the key to stopping any further nonsense from the HOA. Finally, we learned that environmental goals need not be draconian to be effective. Most neighbors wanted to recycle, reduce plastic, and be mindful of waste. The problem lay in Karen's zero-sum approach that demanded everyone adhere to her extreme vision. Once we overcame that, we ended up with new ideas for smaller, more realistic improvements, like a volunteer compost bin or a once-a-year e-waste collection drive. Those initiatives, unburdened by forced compliance, ironically got better participation because they were voluntary and well-coordinated. In the months that followed, rumors persisted that Karen would attempt one last push to rebrand her plan in milder form. Some predicted she'd push for 5 bins or maybe a multi-stream pilot program. But each time she hinted at such things, the rest of the board, wary of another fiasco, shut her down. They reminded her of the city's letter and the strong resident opposition. Meanwhile, talks circulated about upcoming HOA board elections. Neighbors formed an informal caucus, determined to elect members who valued transparency, practicality, and genuine consensus building. Karen, sensing the shift in mood, tried to campaign on a platform of environmental responsibility with respect for local conditions. It rang hollow to many. When election day arrived, she scraped by with a smaller margin, retaining a seat on the board but losing her vice presidential role to Ms. Lane, one of the members who had opposed the 10-bin plan. With her diminished authority, Karen was no longer able to single-handedly propose radical changes. She might still pepper the community with suggestions or detailed personal opinions, but the days of her steamrolling the board were over. Residents breathed easier knowing we had checks and balances in place. Over time, Karen's presence became less disruptive, as if she finally recognized that the neighborhood wouldn't indulge her extremes. But the story of the 10-bin fiasco continued as a cautionary tale in Oak Ridge Villas, retold whenever new residents arrived. We'd chuckle over the memory of that email announcing color-coded containers for every little scrap. "Oh, you missed the great trash bin war," neighbors would say with a smile. "You're lucky. You never had to buy a purple bin for your old batteries." Life settled back to normal, with the standard 3 categories that the city actually supports. We parted ways with illusions of being an avant-garde waste utopia, satisfied with small, sensible steps that didn't bury us under a mountain of plastic tubs. And if you walk by the curb on trash day, you'll see exactly what you'd expect: a trash can, a recycling bin, and, for some, a yard waste bag. Nothing more, nothing less. The day the city's letter arrived, effectively blocking Karen's plan, stands in my mind as a triumph of common sense over micromanagement. Even now, I can recall the hush that fell over the packed HOA meeting room before she grudgingly announced the suspension of her grand scheme. The wave of relief among residents was palpable. We weren't anti-green, as Karen tried to label us. We simply recognized that real environmental action has to mesh with reality, not defy it. In the end, we learned the power of direct action, reading the city codes, collecting signatures, presenting our case logically. We also discovered how crucial it is for neighbors to talk to each other, share concerns, and unify around what's right for the community. If we had each tried to fight Karen alone, we might have been silenced by her aggressive style. Together, we were unstoppable. Karen, for her part, remained in Oak Ridge Villas, though somewhat chastened. Occasionally, she'd propose smaller eco-initiatives, like a volunteer group to pick up litter in the local park. People sometimes joined in, which was all well and good. Nobody disliked the environment or wanted to sabotage legitimate recycling. But never again would we allow her free rein to override the city's protocols or impose burdensome demands on each household without a thorough, open debate. Even now, rummaging through my garage, I chuckle at the memory of her color-coded chart. My modest set of bins, a black can for trash, a blue bin for mixed recyclables, and a stack of yard waste bags, feels refreshingly simple. And that's just fine. Because if there's one thing Oak Ridge Villas realized, it's that practicality, cooperation, and realistic goals trump any fantasy of a forced eco-revolution.